Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Nazia Iqbal and here's a look at the stories for the day. In 2021, India announced production-linked incentive schemes worth $37 billion for 13 sectors ranging from IT hardware to automobiles to semiconductors. The schemes give a renewed push to the 7-year-old Make in India initiative that aims to transform our country into a manufacturing hub. But alleged disregard by factories set up by MNCs in the country may cast a pall on India's manufacturing dreams. Our next report tells us more about what happened at Foxconn in Sriperumbudur and why India should set better examples.
Last week, the Union Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, said the government would love to see the world's largest contract chip maker, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, invest in India, among other firms. His statement came amid the government's efforts to attract semiconductor companies with a $10 billion incentive scheme launched last month. As India tries to woo one Taiwanese giant, another has been embroiled in a labor issue at its factory near Chennai in Tamil Nadu. Protests started at Foxconn's factory after more than 250 women workers who live at one of the company's hostels had to be treated for food poisoning. The factory employs 17,000 workers and makes iPhones for Apple. The Taiwanese company is the world's biggest contract electronics manufacturer. The factory has been shut down since December 18. Some of the women told a news outlet that workers slept on the floor in rooms that housed between 6 to 30 women. The toilets reportedly had no running water, and the food sometimes had worms in them. Food safety officials closed the hostel's kitchen after finding rats and poor drainage. Apple and Foxconn accepted that some dormitories and dining rooms at the factory did not meet the required standards. In fact, Foxconn attracted global media attention after 14 workers committed suicide at its factories in China in 2010 over low pay and stressful work conditions. For Apple, this is the second incident involving a supplier in India in a year. In December 2020, thousands of contract workers at a factory owned by Wistron destroyed equipment and vehicles over alleged non-payment of wages. We spoke with K. Ashok Rao of NCOA, who told us about the way workers are treated in India.
In India, we treat human labor as if they're just an add-on. In Tamil Nadu, what I read in the media is that in textiles, they have what is called system workers, where a woman is employed and she's not given any salary. She's just maintained like an animal. And all her salary is kept for dowry. That's why she's called system worker. Now you can't, and here I read in the newspaper that food was given with worms. I mean, we can't treat human beings like animals and expect them to produce highly sophisticated equipment. That the two don't gel.
There is also another hurdle that India faces as it strives to become a manufacturing hub.
Chairman of Apple, I want to quote exact words of this man from an interview that he gave. He said, the popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor costs. But the truth is China has stopped being a low labor cost many years ago. The reason to come to China is because of skills, the quality of skills in one location and the type of skills it is. The vocational expertise is very, very deep here. And I give education system a lot of credit for continuing to push on even when others are de-emphasizing vocationalization. Now, this is very important. You cannot get into high tech without having very high skilled people. And we don't consider people as very important. You know, we had a national skilling program where we were teaching low skills. See, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, in the year 2025, we are going to enter manufacture of iPhones in a big way. So what kind of skills are required? What kind of specialized skills are required? And then you start building up those specialized skills. It's only then that foreign companies or even Indian companies will make investments.
Apple suppliers are not the only offenders. Recent examples include a BBC report in November 2020 that revealed how Indian workers in factories supplying UK's top supermarket chains were being subjected to exploitative conditions. The US-based Workers' Rights Consortium found that more than 4 lakh workers in Karnataka have not been paid the state's legal minimum wage since April 2020. Instances like these abound in India. Professor Rajesh Joseph, who teaches labour issues at Azim Premji University in Bengaluru, tells us what could be done to improve the lives of factory workers in India.
This is not the first protest which has happened for Foxconn or for any other industry. So what we are seeing is that when workers don't have a voice in the setup, right, then you're obviously going to come out in the street or you're going to have some kind of a violence on the shop floor. And in India also, I feel the minimum wages is too low. And because of that, this kind of a competitiveness which comes up from your own question to say, you know, now will the industry have an adverse effect because of these unrest? I think it's a little problematic to ask that question, because then we are asking that, then do we need to have a labor which doesn't have a voice at all so that, you know, the production can go? Now that's a little dangerous way of looking at it, right? Because then we're not going to have progress for labor itself, because in the end, it is the wages earned which is going to improve the economy. I think we must start talking about living wages for our workers, right? So that they can get the benefit of what the economy is. Now, if state governments are also going in that line to attract industry so that they can make the labor laws beneficial for industry, then there's not going to be any voice from even the government. We should also asking how, in what kind of condition the freedom for the worker is there to address these concerns to the factory concern or to the management, right? If they think that if I tell something, my job will go, then they're not going to talk about it.
Foxconn plans to expand its factory, which has become central to Apple's efforts to shift production away from China. Employees there are now demanding a union to represent them. The worker unrest comes as India is trying to encourage global companies to shift some of their supply chains to India to take advantage of the trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. But it has exposed the working and living conditions of workers at our factories as well as their vulnerability. The government should impress upon companies like Apple on how they should treat Indian labor. Advancement in India's manufacturing prowess should not come at the cost of its workers. India should set a better example than settling for apologies from manufacturers like Foxconn.
Apart from the government's resolve to make the country investment friendly, this year is likely to test the sustainability of the economic growth momentum in India and that of the global economy amid new COVID variants. With the likely withdrawal of easy and cheap money globally, fundamentals would come to fore. Investors will have to be careful in stock selection. So, which sectors look hot and which ones should be avoided in 2022? Let us find out what analysts say. After ending the calendar year 2021 with a gain of 22% on the Sensex and 24% on the Nifty, red flags are now up on the street, with analysts suggesting investors tread carefully as the markets face multiple headwinds, both from domestic and global factors, which can keep them choppy in the year ahead. What could cap the market upside, at least in the short term, is the fast-spreading COVID variant Omicron that has already seen several states adopt a precautionary approach. Some of the other factors that are likely to leave their print on the market performance include policy of global central banks, commodity or crude oil price and impact on inflation, mood among FIIs and retail investors, corporate results and guidance, Union Budget 2022. That said, analysts at Morgan Stanley, for instance, expect the emerging markets, including India, to muddle through most part of 2022 amid rich valuations. Despite downgrading India, the global research and brokerage house remains structurally bullish on Indian equities and is looking for stock-level opportunities to hold exposure. Jonathan F. Garner, Chief Asia and Emerging Market Strategist at Morgan Stanley, says EM equities will continue to struggle next year with only 3% upside to their December 2022 target. According to Credit Suisse, earnings will be the key driver for equity returns. Sectors that lagged the global recovery from the pandemic shock to emerge as bright spots alongside industries that benefit from secular growth trends. Other analysts too echo the same view and suggest stock selection will be key for investors to beat index returns. So which sectors are likely to do well in 2022? Listen in to what Dr. V.K. Vijay Kumar, Chief Investment Strategist at Geojit Financial Services, said.
The very impressive returns of 2020 and 2021 are unlikely to be repeated in 2022. So investors need expect only modest returns in 2022. However, a smart investment strategy can deliver market-beating returns. Investors have to focus on segments which are likely to do well in the coming year. IT is likely to do exceedingly well in 2022. Globally, digitization is in fast-forward mode. Indian IT sector is well positioned to ride this boom. Financials, particularly leading banks, are likely to do well because the economy is in a sharp rebound and credit growth is improving. The low interest rates have turned out to be a major tailwind for the construction sector. So constructions related segments will do well in 2022. Therefore, investors may focus on these three segments.
A similar sentiment is echoed by those at ICICI Securities who expect the IT sector to lead the rally, supported by cyclicals like capital goods and BFSI. Herald Vander Lind, Head of Equity Strategy for Asia Pacific at HSBC, however, suggests staying away from real estate, auto components and sectors that have regulatory uncertainty like PSU banks and utilities. Over the medium term, however, the market direction will be guided by a slew of domestic factors such as the upcoming result season for the quarter ended December 2021, expectations from the union budget that is likely to be presented on February 1. Here are some of the key events that the markets will look forward to in the first quarter of 2022. That said, here are the key levels you need to watch out for this week. With markets attaining new heights, the government appeared striking the right chord on reforms front last year. But not everything went as planned. The centre finally got its hands free of Air India and a lot more was lined up, from the privatization of Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited to key economic bills, including the one on privatization of 2 public sector banks. However, as they say, there is many a slip between the cup and the lips. Upcoming elections and farmers' protest forced the government to take a U-turn on the 3 farm laws. And it also didn't table any key economic bill in the winter session of Parliament. Now, with 2021 over, let us look at how the government is likely to take forward its reforms and economic agenda this year.
The long-awaited sale of Air India to Tata Group in October, the Modi government's first privatization deal in 7 years, had sparked hope that the present regime was going strong on its reform agenda. Several other legislations, from the 3 farm laws to the 4 labor codes to the privatization of state-owned banks, were lined up. However, after the end of 2021, the government and its proponents can only write home about the Air India sale, for everything else has been stalled. The farm laws were withdrawn as the Modi government gave in to the year-long farmers' agitation, The lesson from the entire saga seems to be that any attempt at reform in agriculture, no matter how noble and well-intentioned, cannot be taken without the consent of farmers. Now, fearing a similar backlash from trade unions, the Modi government seems to have delayed the implementation of the 4 labour codes until the state elections. Despite the sale of Air India, the government will likely miss its disinvestment target of Rs 1.75 trillion for fiscal year 2022, since the bid to privatize Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited hasn't advanced yet. The privatization of state-owned banks was another no-show, with the government yet to even announce the names of the 2 public sector banks that will be privatized. Media reports suggest that here too, the government was anticipating protests by bank unions. Hence, the Banking Laws Amendment Bill 2021 wasn't brought in the recently concluded Parliament session. The bill to regulate cryptocurrencies was also held up. We spoke to Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist at CARE Ratings, to get a better understanding of why the government was unsuccessful in these instances.
All the reforms which were purely economic in nature, when I say economic in nature, is those which did not have any political or social consequences, did go through quite easily, and the government has been very successful out there. However, when we are talking of issues where there are political and social ramifications, it's but prudent that governments have to consider all these conditions before they go in for these reforms. And that's where I think they have not really met with success. Like, for example, if you look at the farm laws, to my mind, I think they are very progressive reforms, something which will really help to commercialize agriculture and bring agriculture better off, make agriculture better off. But what we have seen is that since there are strong vested interests which are involved out here and which have political clout, and given the fact that we also have the elections coming through in Punjab, I think it was but natural that one had to take a more placatory note when it came to dealing with the farm laws. I think in a democracy, one has to take all interests into consideration before you really go in for these reforms. And that's why things like this, things also on the labor front, I think will get held up and will take longer time for them to be accomplished. And it's going to be work in progress.
While Air India was a big win for the government, its plans for LIC in the coming year might face serious hurdles. Sabnavis tells us more.
But for LIC, I think it's going to be a bit tougher because I think the problem with LIC is you're talking of getting something like 1 lakh crores in a year for 10%, maybe 10% of this investment which people are talking about. And we've, of course, had a very good time for the stock markets. So the valuation would have been much easier maybe a couple of months back. But today, when we're talking of a situation in which the stock market has started becoming volatile, moving generally in the downward direction, we have other forces like what the Federal Reserve is going to do, how foreign funds are going to behave. There's a big question mark over whether this investment part will be fulfilled or not. So there's also a case of saying that does the market really have an appetite for 1 lakh crores of funds? See, in the past, we have seen a lot of these IPOs have gotten a lot of retail interest. Now, as we come to the end of the financial year, will there be enough retail interest? If it has to be institutional investors, there's going to be more deep dive analysis about LIC. And there will always be this issue about what would be the valuation. So I think this particular issue, I think we'll, of course, get to know by March whether the disinvestment really takes off or not.
Hopefully, the government will learn from the farm laws episode, sound economic agenda, and reforms that appear good, at least on paper, still need the backing of all the stakeholders involved in a democracy like India. If it takes this lesson to heart, it will have a better chance of enacting its economic agenda this year.
Markets favor a stable government, and political parties, which are part of the government, periodically go to polls to prove that they enjoy the confidence of citizens. The dates for the upcoming polls in 5 states are likely to be announced in the next 15 days. Last month, the government tabled and passed a bill to amend the law relating to elections. But one of the changes which linked electoral rolls with the Aadhaar ecosystem was in the eye of the storm. Our next report tells us more about it.
When the Election Laws Amendment Bill 2021 was tabled in Rajya Sabha on December 21st, members of opposition parties stormed into the well of the House. TMC MP Derek O'Brien was suspended for throwing a rule book at the reporters' table. It all happened when the opposition's motion to send the legislation to a select committee was defeated. But just like the Lok Sabha, the bill sailed through the upper house amid the protests. It awaits the president's nod to become a law. Through the bill, the government is amending both the Representation of the People Acts of 1950 and 1951. One of its main provisions creates a legal framework to link electoral roll data with Aadhaar. The government said it was meant to strike out bogus voters, foreigners who are wrongfully included as voters, and also those who are enrolled in more than one constituency. While tabling the bill, Union Law Minister Kiren Rijiju had said that only those who use bogus voter list will oppose this bill. The new rule empowers the electoral registration officers to ask a person applying for a new voter ID to furnish his Aadhaar number for the purpose of establishing identity. They can also seek Aadhaar numbers from registered voters to check for duplication. While the government has insisted that furnishing Aadhaar is voluntary, the wording of the bill raises doubts about such assertions. It says that no one shall be denied registration and no entry shall be deleted from the electoral roll due to a person's inability to furnish Aadhaar number due to sufficient cause as may be prescribed. This suggests that the government will define what constitutes a sufficient cause for a person to not submit his Aadhaar. Such individuals will be allowed to furnish alternate documents as will be prescribed by the government. The opposition parties have claimed that provisions of the bill violate the Supreme Court's 2015 judgment that limits the use of Aadhaar to financial and welfare benefits. They said that the Apex Court had barred unnecessary expansion of the scope of Aadhaar to other areas of life. In 2018, voter ID cards were linked with the Aadhaar database in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Later, names of at least 55 lakh voters went missing from the electoral rolls. It forced the government to roll back the decision. Apart from this, the bill also seeks to designate April 1, July 1 and October 1 as qualifying dates in addition to January 1 for the enrollment of 18-year-olds as voters. As of now, only those who turned 18 on or before January 1 of every year are allowed to register as voters. Another amendment allows the elections to become gender neutral for service voters. Currently, an army man's wife is entitled to be enrolled as a service voter, but a woman army officer's husband is not. This is set to change as the bill replaces the word wife with the word spouse in the relevant statute.
The upcoming elections will be a litmus test for these new norms, which will soon be notified and turn into law. That's all we have for you today. We will be back with more news and analysis in our next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.